Welcome. Here we are again, and this time I'm going to have a go at running the session. I'll do my best because we're going to share quite a bit of Rachel's story about her healing journey. Because what we want to do is dive more into needs, because we've had a lot of feedback actually from friends and others who found, I think it was episode 5 in particular, like people approached me when I was at the grocery store and like, oh yeah, episode 5 was so cool, and I took lots of notes, and I'm like, well, can I see them? So they like took them on their phone and showed me the notes that they took. And
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was so cool. I love it. And this concept of separating out needs from strategy was really helpful. But needs is still a bit of a struggle. So we want to come at it again. But this time we're going to do a deeper dive and really focus in on needs. And Rachel is going to really help sort of guide us through. Welcome to Magenta FM, a show for people who aspire to deeper, richer, and more healthy ways of being in community, in leadership, and in relationship with others. I'm Louisa Barnum.
And I'm Rachel Hazlett-Carr.
Actually, there's a way that we're going to do this. We're going to do it's kind of like what is it when you cut open an animal? What is that called?
A dissection.
Yes. We're going to dissect needs.
Yes.
And we have a kind of a tool that we want to share with our audience.
Picture.
Yeah, it's like an analog or a picture, and it's called the iceberg. And it's actually used in a lot of different contexts, including systems thinking as a kind of a diagnostic tool. And so I've adapted it from systems thinking to personal development and relationships, because it's so darn helpful.
Yeah.
So the iceberg, the idea of it is you can only see a tiny little bit that pokes above the water, but the bulk of it is below the waterline.
Why don't you start with the top of the iceberg? Okay.
So the top of the iceberg, the bit that pokes out of the water, is the bit that we can see easily, right? And that, we're going to give it a name, and we're going to call it the events in your life. So imagine a newspaper heading, like...
Man comes home late.
Exactly. Or man annoyed me because he did something or said something and I got triggered. Like, this happened today or yesterday. It's like just an event where you got triggered or got annoyed or had some feelings coming up. So this is the tool. If you can imagine an event that you really are puzzled by or want to work on because it's really troubled you, then that's what you would put at the with the iceberg tip poking out of the water. And then what happens next?
So what happens below the tip, the first level, is feelings.
Right below the waterline.
Right below the waterline. Those are typically easy for us to notice ourselves. Anger, disappointment, sadness,
outrage.
Yes. We'll typically can easily identify at least a couple of feelings if we're having a reaction. If we're triggered and we're reacting to something.
In the event.
Right. Then we can notice maybe a couple feelings that are safe feelings, or feelings that we are allowed to feel.
Yeah,
maybe we're allowed to feel sad, but we're not allowed to feel angry.
Or the other way around.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So feelings are what lie right below the surface.
Yeah, and the reason why we put feelings right below the surface is because it's actually quite challenging to identify what you actually feel. And in the English language, there are a lot of words that are feeling words. And we maybe use 4 out of all the options that there are.
Yeah.
Because we have a limited range of feelings that we're allowed, or that we are even aware of. Like it's not a kind of a vernacular that we typically use in life, because we often are not even allowed to have feelings, especially in professional contexts.
Right.
People don't want to know what your feelings are, okay?
Yeah. So you can actually just disassociate right there at that level and just not even have conscious of the feeling level, nor anything below that.
Right, exactly. So, but you are having feelings, even if you experience numbness, like you're not even aware, they are there, and they are very important because they're clues to the next level down. Is it my turn or your turn?
Your turn.
Which are needs. Okay, so this is kind of, the central topic. And the needs, you could say, so this is the next strata down in the iceberg. We are even less aware of our needs than we are of our feelings. So that's why they're down in the murkier, watery aspects of the iceberg. But needs are also important because they, specifically the unmet needs, are driving what we're feeling, which more often than we realize actually are driving the events that happen in our lives. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, toward the end of the episode, I think.
Let's give our definition of needs for those who need a refresher.
Yeah.
Well, needs are something you need, and they are beautiful, true, and good.
Give some examples.
So some examples would be a need for peace, or a need for trust, or a need for safety.
Or autonomy, or independence.
Yeah.
Or love.
Or to
connection,
be
to be seen, to be heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a list that we'll link to.
Yes, we do. So that's needs. Now, what comes below that?
Below needs, what is driving our needs is actually our beliefs. So what we are believing about the people around us, about our life, about our circumstances.
About what happened.
Mm-hmm. Those are all driving what we are needing, the needs that are coming up in us.
So just to review, that's 4 strata. The very top is most easily seen, the events that happen in our lives. Right below the waterline, where we're not as aware, is the feelings. Below that, even less aware of what we need. And the needs that Rachel and I are pointing to is the unmet needs specifically. Those are the most interesting. Below those unmet needs is beliefs. Now, there's another strata below beliefs, and we're going to call that worldviews. So worldviews, what we mean by that is the things that you could say that you believe about the world and about yourself that drive the beliefs that you have about the event. So, for instance, a worldview could be materialism. What's another example of a worldview?
A worldview could also be entitlement. You could believe that the world revolves around you.
That's right.
And that you... that you shouldn't have to work very hard, or you may have beliefs about, yourself or others, but you have this worldview that you're entitled, you're privileged because of some, reason.
Yeah. Another worldview could be that you have to work incredibly hard for success. You could also believe that you do not matter. This is one of my personal favorites.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about this in the past, that you do not matter, or the world is ruled by indifferent gods who do not care about you.
Yeah.
I think we talked about this in episode 7, at least in my case.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tricky to tell the difference between beliefs and worldviews because they can sound very similar, but it's actually helpful to lean into a bit of differentiation between them.
Yeah.
Because for instance, you could have a worldview that you are a biomechanical machine.
Or that the world is a simulation.
Right.
What's the implication if you believe that the world is a simulation? If that's your worldview, then you may believe that there's no moral consequences for actions, or that everything is meaningless.
Right, or that the world is run by competition, survival of the fittest.
Dog eat dog world.
Yes. And that in that case, the way that we behave in business contexts, I mean, we see how businesses can behave toward each other in this competitive landscape.
Yeah.
It can be brutal and very unmoralistic.
Yes.
Not very empathic. So there's these worldviews that are just sort of the substrata of how, they influence how we behave and what we believe about ourselves and the nature of the world.
And they're often, at least in part, inherited by our culture and possibly from our family culture also, but our larger culture.
We live in this highly materialistic age. So much of the way that we think about, for instance, disease comes out of a materialistic worldview, and therefore how we think about healing and causes very much influence the causes of disease, or illness, or what we do to ourselves, like breaking a leg.
Yeah.
It all comes out of this particular worldview. And of course, it can be culturally a little bit different. But if you live in the Western world...
Yeah, you compare it to like a shamanic worldview.
Right, you were just telling me that story earlier.
Yeah, that if you have a shamanic worldview, which I'm not an expert on shamanism, but if you believe that there is a living spirit behind all of nature and all of the world, everything that's inhabiting the world physically, that there is a spiritual nature behind it.
Right.
That, you can learn to work with. That has big implications.
Huge. Yeah, profound implications, actually, because if you believe that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience, it changes everything about the way that you view other people, about the way that you view nature, and your part to play.
Yeah.
Your destiny, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's enough about worldview. All right, so that's it. Those are the 5 layers, and worldview is at the very bottom, way down in the dark depths of the ocean. And the reason is because this is an analog for, you could say, below the waterline for the subconscious realm. And much of what we feel, need, believe, and the worldviews that we carry are largely unconscious until we examine them and get to know them within us.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the story that Rachel's going to tell today, because we want to give you a real example of that process, of that work.
Right, because in episode 5, we talked about intervening at the level of needs, like noticing your needs, making requests.
Yeah.
It's really helpful. It's a very powerful tool to have in our toolkit. We believe that everyone should have those tools of naming your needs, acknowledging them, making requests and not demands.
Yeah.
And all of that wonderful work of nonviolent communication that was created by Marshall Rosenberg. And we also know that there are situations in which we need to have a different intervention and we need to intervene at the layers below needs.
Yes.
So, so I'm going to share a personal story. It's largely around trust. So I've had issues around trust my whole life. These issues came up most strongly in areas of romantic relationships. I would say on the surface, if you met me, you wouldn't immediately see that I was, a very distrusting or a paranoid person.
Not at all.
Yeah.
No.
But I had a good strategy of managing it by keeping my romantic relationships sort of at an arm's distance. I became a single mom when I was pretty young. And so it was an easy way to keep my child and myself and my home in, one part of my life, my central primary part of my life, and then keep relationships sort of on the periphery and not let people...
It's a good excuse, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a great excuse. It was a good strategy for...
keeping everybody out.
Keeping everyone out, right.
Yeah.
But I did do a lot of work around these issues and got to the point where I was ready to let someone in. And that was something I really wanted. I did really want partnership and intimacy and family. So I reached that point. You know, those issues that I'd worked on, they were still there and needed to be worked on at another level, at a higher level, and actually in partnership. Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. So there would be events that would happen, situations in my relationship with my now husband that would trigger my distrust. These events, these top of the iceberg events, which it's pretty easy to stop there if you want to, where you can just see an event and you just blame the other person and you can say, well, you did X, and so therefore you are untrustworthy.
Right.
And, you know, everything, this just confirms everything.
Right. Right.
But I was able to go below the waterline. Well, actually, I should say that the level below the waterline of feelings was pretty apparent, because it would bring up anger or rage or sadness kind of below that. Like the anger was more present, and the sadness I sort of had to, you know, get in touch with.
Can you give a few more examples of feeling words like disdain? Was that part of it? Not so much.
Disappointment. Yeah, let down. Disappointment. Distrust.
Impatience.
Yeah. At different times, you know, these different feelings would kind of pop up at different levels at different times.
Right.
Yeah. So thankfully I did have the work of, you know, I did have the tools of nonviolent communication, of NVC, to go to the layer below feelings and acknowledge my needs there. And
what were those?
Security, trust, safety. Those are the big ones that would come up a lot. You know, I need security. I need safety. I need reliability. I need trust. I was conscientious of not making explicit demands on my husband, you know, because I already had this, you know, moral sense that I shouldn't, you know, make a demand on somebody, that I needed to leave him free. But I would get so triggered and so upset and falling apart that in a way that's, you know, it was making an implicit demand.
Was a demand.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if he didn't comply,
between a rock and a hard place,
he would be in big trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there I was. And, you know, bless his heart, he wanted to meet those needs.
But it wasn't enough.
It wasn't enough, exactly.
No.
And over time, it became more apparent to me that no matter how much he gave or tried to prove his
reliability, trustworthiness.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
There was still this part of me that could get triggered and not trust.
Right. So what that means is that there was a black hole.
Yeah.
So no matter how much you asked or acknowledged what you needed, you know, you went through the NVC protocol. Okay, so this is what happened. This is what I felt. This is what I needed. Make my request. That's the NVC protocol, right? That we all do if we are able, right? And it still wasn't healing.
Right.
It wasn't helping. I mean, it was helping, but it wasn't freeing you from the trap of not being able to trust.
Yeah.
Or how would you describe that?
Well, I think that I like that terminology, the black hole.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
The black hole of feelings, you know, like no matter whatever, you know, goes in there, it's never going to be enough.
Right.
Yeah, it reminds me of something that we worked with this premarital counselor before we got married, and she was lovely, and one thing that she said to us was that she sort of advised us to avoid each other's landmines, as she put it, you know, get to know your partner and like avoid their landmines as a gesture of, you know, love and compassion. And it's a very sweet idea. But it was not the level of intervention that I was wanting for myself, you know, having somebody tiptoeing around my landmines did not feel...
It was not healthy. It's not a healthy way of being in a relationship. Huh?
No.
Better to not have the landmine.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. That's what I was... that's what I was, deeply aiming for.
Okay, so let's take a break real quick, and then we're going to get back to Rachel's story, but we're going to look at beliefs.
Okay, sounds good. Hello, thank you for watching or listening to today's episode of Magenta FM. We want to take a moment and tell you that we have a lot of useful resources for you on our website at magenta.fm.
And actually, we want you to know that we're now regularly holding and hosting webinars. And in those webinars, we dive into some really juicy and challenging topics. We don't just do a bunch of downloading. We actually do exercises. We bring tools. We journal right there and then, and we do plenary, and of course, lots of Q&A. So you can go to our website at magenta.fm. You can sign up for the next available webinar, and we're holding those on a regular basis. So we hope to see you there.
And lastly, one of the best ways that you can support our show is by sharing it with friends or family who you think might find it helpful or interesting. So you can just pause the show right now, text your friend a link to magenta.fm/podcast, and there they can see all the episodes and listen to the most recent one or one that jumps out at them. And we really appreciate your support.
Thank you so much. All right, welcome back. So we're going to talk about beliefs. You remember the next strata down. So how, you were stuck at this point. You're like going back and forth, from needs to feelings, to triggers of feelings and need. And there was a black hole, and you realized that there was a black hole. What happened next?
So I did the very painful and challenging work of, diving into and investigating the beliefs that were driving these needs and these feelings and these reactions, and owning that these needs were actually, just coming out of beliefs that I was holding. And that it wasn't really about him; it was really about me. So that act of first to myself, like acknowledging, like, oh, I really see that there, I'm holding this belief, and actually this is not true. This isn't accurate. This belief that I have about him, that he is untrustworthy, it actually does not align with what I know about this person that I'm in love with. There's a big disconnect, Right. Because if you were to just, ask me when I wasn't triggered, like, what do you believe about your husband? I wouldn't say I believe he's untrustworthy or he's selfish or he's incompetent. But there are moments when I'd be triggered that I would believe those things. Right. So I would believe, oh, he's so untrustworthy, I just can't trust him, or he's so incompetent, or he's not safe, or he's just like really selfish and looking out for himself, and I'm not safe here.
You would really believe it when you were triggered. You'd be like, I was triggered, I am so sure that this is true.
Yeah, but it did not line up with what I actually believed when I wasn't triggered. Right. So that showed me, like, there's this disconnect, so this actually isn't about him.
I think this is really important.
Otherwise, I would believe that all the time. Right. I would not be with this person. I wouldn't be falling in love with him. Right.
Right. And so, like, this is so important that we just have to go over this again, just to make sure that everyone is following with us. When you were triggered, you had a set of beliefs that you were very sure of. You were convinced.
Oh, yeah. You heard me. Louisa? He is just not trustworthy.
That's right. And nothing would shake you from that, right? You were just so sure. But then when you weren't triggered anymore, like, oh, no, he's totally fine. He's trustworthy. I love him. I'm in love with him. I totally trust him. I trust him with my son, you know, and I've had the same experience as well, that when I'm triggered, I'm so certain that my husband usually is to blame.
Yeah.
And when I'm not triggered, I can see how he wasn't to blame. It was actually more about me, but not until I'm calm.
Yeah.
And have, you know, when I'm not triggered anymore, am I able to see?
Yeah.
And it's very confusing until you understand this concept of belief.
Right. And how our beliefs, they can be kind of, you know, if they're transient or they're like tricky, then that's sort of an alert to us that, you know, something's off, something is driving this that's not, you know, actually reality.
Can you speak more to your beliefs and maybe even why they're there?
Yeah. So, well, like I said, I would believe that he was he was untrustworthy, that he was unsafe. Well, driving all of this we'll have to get to the lower level, which was the worldview.
Okay.
So it really wasn't about him, as we've said. So it was actually, when I interrogated it, I just believed, you know, there's a part of me that believed that no one was trustworthy, that the world was not to be trusted, not trustworthy. It wasn't a safe place for me. You know, and I could trace how this came out of my childhood, out of trauma, some in cultural and family inheritance, and
how you internalized trauma.
Yes.
This is how you internalized it.
Right. I internalized trauma by assuming or just believing that everyone around me was incompetent. That was a big worldview that came out of it. That people aren't necessarily terrible or bad, but they're just incompetent and they can't really meet me or see me or care for me or keep, you know, that I'm you know, safe around people. So I can't really rely on people, and I have to just rely on myself.
Right.
And that's how I'll be safe.
Right.
And
what was the consequence of that?
Well, the consequence of that was that one consequence was that I became highly competent.
Yes. Yeah. I can speak to that.
Yeah. I became highly competent and very good at taking care of myself.
And also others. Yeah, because you've been in leadership positions.
Yeah.
You're CEO of your last company.
Yeah.
With how many, like 30 employees?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or my son, or looking out for my friends, or just, you know, just taking care, just like stepping up and
being the one who's competent.
Yeah.
In the room.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you're in my company. But anyway.
And the flip side of that, you know, like any coping mechanism, it gets you so far, and it did a great job getting me very far.
Yeah.
And then it gets you reach a point where your coping mechanism doesn't get you where you need to go.
Right.
And so for me, that threshold was in a, you know, real partnership that was.
Can you just say that again? Because this was another truth bomb that I think it's really important that our listeners fully understand.
Yeah.
What got you? What did you say? What got you where you were? Let's just say this, you know, you saw the operating beliefs.
Yeah.
And they are coping mechanisms, like keep romantic relationships at a distance. People are incompetent. People are not trustworthy.
Yeah.
You became uber competent as a kind of a, you know, pearl out of the sandy oyster,
you
know, gift that you had to build as a coping mechanism, as a strategy to survive in a hostile or unsafe world.
Yeah.
But you recognized that it got you there, and we're very grateful for, you know, strategies and coping mechanisms that get us and keep us safe.
Yeah.
But
get us through.
Yeah.
But they get us. We reach a point with our coping mechanisms where they will no they become a hindrance, where what got us here is not going to get us where we need to go
That's
next.
so important to recognize. Yeah.
And so for me, like I said, that threshold was trusting and intimate partnership. The flip side of being super competent was not trusting that other people were safe and keeping people at arm's distance.
Right.
And so I had to, really come to terms with that worldview.
Right.
And own it. Which, like I said, was, there's this real kind of challenge in like, okay, I'm going to fess up, I'm going to confess that this is actually at the root of it. But then on the other side of that, there's just this like freedom, this unburdening.
The truth will set you free.
Yes. And a freedom from all of that anger and rage that I was just projecting onto my husband. A freedom from like looking to this person to meet this black hole of a need and setting our relationship up for, a really hard time if we had kept going at it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because he'd be constantly under the thumb trying to avoid the landmines.
Yes.
And the landmines the consequences are severe.
Yeah.
If he does something that triggers you. It's terrible to have to tiptoe around someone's landmines.
Yeah. So owning up to it, owning it, seeing it, naming it, that was all the first step, and a really important step that, took work, but was ultimately so liberating.
Wow. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
It's like you own it and then you're liberated.
Yeah.
But we instinctively want to put it on someone else so that we don't have to own it.
Right.
So we can be liberated that way. Oh, it's somebody else's fault. I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But that's not the liberation that you need.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, no, it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't actually work.
Give away your power that way.
Yes. And then we just live in, this blame mentality. So that was the first step. And then the second step was like, okay, what do I do to actually change this worldview? What do I actually, what do I do to actually build trust?
Right. How the heck? What did you do?
Okay, so I had to find a way to rebuild trust, which was kind of taken away from me.
Yeah.
In a way, not to be like victim-y about it, but that was no longer in my repertoire of, my inner life. And what I found was that I had to build my trust vertically to the spiritual world and actually see and feel that I was being held and cared for and that I was secure and safe by the spiritual world.
Okay, so let's back up.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot in what you just said. So can we just unpack that?
Yeah, there's a lot to it.
There's a lot to it. And we're going to get into it. But first we need to talk about the consequences of trauma, especially if you went through traumatic experience as a child, whether that was because you had an unsafe attachment to one of your caregivers or both or something, or if there were experiences that you had as a child that were traumatic. One of the main consequences of that is that you grow up with trust issues, like it's just a given. And when Rachel said it was taken away from her, I think what you meant was it's not really possible for you to trust the world like a child. Like those of us who have not been through severe traumatic experience, we naturally trust the world and we naturally have a trust with other people. It's not something that we question. It's only once we have reason to not trust because of traumatic experience that we lose that childlike natural state of trusting being. Mm-hmm. And so people who have gone through traumatic experience, we have to, it's very important that we learn to trust, but we're not going to be able to go back and trust in this very natural given way.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because there are other ways that we can build trust. And so, Rachel, take it away. How did you do it?
Okay, well, I guess the first piece was that I've had a meditation practice since I was like 20 or 21 years old. That really helped me clarify my thinking and just like think and see clearly and get more clear on like my feelings and my intuition. And so that was sort of like a muscle that I needed as I, was navigating this, question of like, am I actually safe? Am I actually secure? Why have I had the experiences that I've had? And so that was the first step, was sort of like building these muscles of intuition through my thinking and feeling and, meditating every day.
And why was intuition so important?
Because I was exploring things that are invisible.
Right. Because trust is invisible.
Yeah.
And what kind of safety do you mean? Do you mean physical safety? Do you mean something else?
I would say physical safety is part of it, but it's more security. It's more like that
existential security? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because when you're in situations where you might have been triggered about your physical safety, now you have a sense of trust in yourself.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? So, because people might be a bit confused, like, does she mean that she now feels safe walking through the world? Like, what kind of safety is it?
Yeah. No, it's more like safety that I am, like that my path is happening for a reason, that there is like this sort of meaning and purpose to the path that I'm on. And, in a way I'm being like guided and held for this like higher purpose.
So you had to come to that understanding, or that experiential understanding, or that feeling knowing?
The feeling knowing.
Uh-huh.
Of the intuition, because
Right.
these are all, invisible.
So instead of being in a world that could, knock you down at any moment for reasons unknown to you, like bad luck,
right,
or whatever,
and just like keep you down, keep you down. To back up a little bit, so the second part of it was really kind of like study of different people, different ideas around the spiritual world, and sort of the esoteric ideas of our time, or through history, and like navigating these different pictures. Like I was really drawn to that from very early, I think, trying to like make sense of why is this my path, and like how does the world work, how does the invisible world work?
Right.
And like
right.
That's where I really needed my intuition and like my clear thinking and sort of like experimentation and like trying ideas on, and like does that actually seem true?
Using your common sense in a way, even though these are invisible realms, and the word spirituality is like, whoa, are we like new age people? Like what the heck?
Right.
But you're talking about entering into these spiritual concepts and study
with discernment,
but with common sense and discernment.
Exactly. So somebody just saying like, well, we're all one and one love, or one, like that wasn't going to help me.
No,
like that. Right. I don't know. Like that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make logical sense to me. That doesn't compute with like my experience of
it's
the
abstract
world.
It's very abstract.
Yeah. So I really, dove deep into study of the spiritual world from a lot of different angles, and writers and mystics and teachers, and came to a picture and a clarity of the spiritual world that really lined up and made sense with my experiences. And
gave your suffering meaning.
yes.
Right.
Right. And gave me the sort of assurance that, Rachel, when you're in your, clear thinking and you're not triggered, you are clear and you are making good decisions, and you are you're
trustworthy. Is it?
Yeah. Well, and it's like you're on the right path.
Right.
You married the right person.
Right.
Like,
right.
You're doing your work and you're not alone, and you're safe, and you're going to face challenges, but you are safe, and you're in a good place, and the higher part, your higher self knows what is true, and
you can
rely
clue
on
into that, right?
Yeah.
So I keep mentioning self-trust, so I may as well just come out with it.
Yeah.
So what the picture that arises in me when you say all of that is that you built a trust and a faith in yourself. So this is something that, in a way gets taken from us when we go through these traumatic experiences, and we have to, what can happen is we develop these coping mechanisms and strategies for protection by, for instance, trying to manage the emotional fields around us, or managing the people around us as best we can to keep ourselves safe.
Yeah. And
that means that we can really shroud ourselves, like we don't know who we are because we're so busy controlling and managing life, so that we can be safe. Everything revolves around that. So this is one experience that we can have, and the way out of that is to learn how to trust yourself.
Yeah.
But what's so interesting about your story is that you didn't learn to trust yourself as in, I'm going to trust myself. You actually did it in this indirect way, because by doing all this spiritual study and experimentation, you learned to trust yourself and your clear thinking, your intuition.
Yeah.
And obviously when you're not triggered. But even then you could witness
the trigger. Like,
yes.
you're triggered,
I'm
Rachel.
triggered. Yeah.
So that's something that we've talked about before. And I've always sort of, I don't think I use that term because for my own personal story, it like closely resembles my, I can only trust myself.
Oh, got you.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So like there's been times where, you've talked about self-trust, and I'm like, no, I only trust myself. That's not me.
You're the
at
only
all.
competent person in the room.
I'm the only competent person. Yes.
Gotcha.
So it's, and that's not what you're describing.
No, but that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a self-trust, but it's actually a trusting a part of myself that is higher than actually just me. And that like vertical trust sort of gave me permission to allow other people in more.
Right.
So it's not like, now I just, trust in God and my husband is still at arm's length,
Yeah, that's not the answer. Sorry, but no.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you're going to have to say more about that, because this higher power, it's like we need and we should have an anatomy. Right? We talk about tethering. That was a word that I learned from a client some years ago, who also had a very strong and loving spiritual practice. And she also struggled with trust issues, uber competent human being. And she was the one who described this process of she needed to strengthen her tether, so that she didn't have to always be the only competent person and manage everything and take everything on, but allow delegation, for instance, because she was a leader in her own company, and she's not the only one where this word tether is the best word we could come up with to describe this.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you can speak more to that and just try and give. I mean, it's hard because our language, especially English, is such a materialistically appropriate language.
Yeah.
Very difficult
Yeah.
to find the articulation for spiritual concepts. So that's a part of the struggle. So sometimes we, use a lot of words to try and then we have to argue over, okay, what are the semantics of these words? So anyway, do your best.
Okay, so you're looking for
just describe this tethering. Like, can you give us some kind of a step, like a strata or something?
Interesting. Okay, I'll try. Above the self, just like day weight consciousness, the first strata that comes up for me is the witness.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what's that?
So the witness is the part of myself that it says, Rachel, you're triggered. And can see, what is that part of me? If there's, there's the part that's like, I believe 100%, 100% of me believes that my husband is untrustworthy, or it is his fault.
Right.
So then there's this other, part of me, or almost like other being that's like, I can see you and no, that's not true.
Right.
This isn't the truth, and you know it.
Right.
Like the wise voice on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm. Witnessing, but not judging, but has the truth.
And then above the witness is the higher self.
Well, I think the higher self is at its kernel you as an individuality, is a unique signature that's you. Right. And the higher self is the wholly spiritual part of you. It's the only part of you that has no shadow.
The higher self is something that we will get into in more depth in another episode, and that we really go into in the school.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a really important concept for us to carry as a kind of anatomy of what we are as human beings, because it's the way that we heal from these psychic traumatic woundings. We all have stuff we've got to work through. Maturities to grow, weaknesses to become strong in. And it's our higher self, through the power of cognition, that is the means through which we heal.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that we talk about it, just not now. Sorry.
Yeah. So just to kind of bring us back to, our story that we're sharing today, as an illustration of events that we can easily, blame others for, and the feelings that lie underneath them, and then the needs that lie under those, and then the beliefs and worldviews that drive our needs and feelings, and drive, what events show up in our life, or what events we react to.
Yeah. And it really happens the other way around as well.
Yeah.
What we believe, what our worldviews really shape what we believe about ourselves and others, which shape our unmet needs and the degree to which we're able to get them met or not, which shape how we feel about things.
Yeah.
Which in turn shape what happens to us.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true. And I'll just add that, through this work, our needs change and evolve.
That's true.
And, something that we feel like adamantly, like it's like a pressing need all the time. Like, I need to be seen. I need to be seen. I need to be seen. I need to be seen, like this,
Yes.
And then suddenly you do this work, and then it's like not, knocking on your door all the time.
Yeah.
This flashing red light of, Look at me. Look at me.
Exactly.
Unmet need.
Yeah.
That's just one example. And, this is just my story. This is just like, a story from my life. And there's so many different ways that these strata can, take shape for people, from like a worldview that, that then, feeds a need to be perfect or be, like I said, be seen all the time. If you believe that the world doesn't see you, then you can have this nagging need to
be recognized.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a very good point. So there's sort of one more thing that we can touch on, which is, in Rachel's story, and I hope that our listeners can listen to Rachel's story and apply their own situation in Rachel's story. That's why we're sharing it.
Yeah.
Because we tried to make it as not too heavy in detail, so that you guys could like put your own story in there and get a feel for the main movements of the path.
Yeah. Insert your own trigger or your own reaction.
Yes.
And,
follow along.
Follow down from there.
Yeah, exactly. But this does something that Rachel brought up earlier with me before we started doing this is, okay, but what about in situations where there is actually a crossing of boundaries, like inappropriate behavior in a relationship? Like it can't all just be about, I'm responsible. You're not responsible for someone else's behavior and how they're showing up for you. You're just responsible for your own triggers and your own beliefs and your own feelings and needs, right? Or unmet needs and worldview. So what do you do in a relationship situation where it is dysfunctional and it is problematic?
Yeah.
What is that,
I know.
How do you carry this information?
Yeah, exactly. We don't want someone to listen to this story and then, they have like a, partner at home who's, an alcoholic and drinking all day, or they're, being unfaithful and
untrustworthy.
Yeah, exactly.
Not showing up for you.
Right.
Yeah. We want to give you a little something before we leave you in this episode to chew on, because the bottom line is it is always an inside job, but it doesn't mean, we don't mean by that you take responsibility for someone else's stuff that it's really their job to take responsibility for. That's not what we're advocating for. But what we are saying is even, so in any relationship situation, you cannot change the other person. If they are going to hit the gym beam, which I understand is a really cheap form of whiskey, every night, and it's getting earlier and earlier every day, it's their job to face their demons or not. And of course, we want to support our loved ones as best we can, and we can't do the work for them. That's just being codependent. So what do we do? Well, I want to give you a trifecta of concepts that I hope will be kind of useful. Like the first one is you are in an entanglement. So if you're in a difficult situation in a relationship, let's just give that a name, and it's called entanglement. Because you have somehow ended up in that situation. So if you can get into it, you can get out of it, obviously. And there's a invisible energetic pattern that is the reason why you're in that entanglement. There's something for you to learn in there. Now I can't, there's infinite numbers of kinds of entanglements, so I can't begin to guess what they might be, but you can straighten out the threads and find your way through. Another way of saying entanglement is shadow dancing. So one way to think about unconscious parts of this is that your shadow and their shadow recognized each other and were attracted to each other because you both, through this rubbing together and this friction, is something that you both could gain from, some wisdom to be gained from that shadow dancing. I often think that like chemistry between people is actually the shadows recognizing each other. That's my theory for why people, chemistry between people.
Well, there's like that strong initial attraction, like, oh, I'm attracted to you, not you or you, but you, and like, oh, you just happen to have the perfect opposite, puzzle piece to my wound.
Exactly.
So, like an example would be, if you're like in kind of a controlling relationship, it's your responsibility 100% to heal your side of it. You can't change the other person, but you change yourself, and you see that you trace the iceberg, and you get to the root of, why am I setting myself up for this? Why am I allowing myself to be controlled?
Yes, for instance.
And you don't, wait for the someday when you're going to magically change the other person.
All right. Or they're going to magically change.
You take care of what you need to take care of.
And that's the second of this trifecta, which is energetic boundaries. So a boundary is really hard. You can forcefully implement a boundary, or you can implement an energetic boundary where you no longer need this entanglement in your life. And I can assure you that the second one is much more effective. And then the third one of the three is your healing journey. So they're all kind of the same thing, but I'm just trying to give three different pictures of the same thing. Your healing journey, this entanglement is in your life for a reason, and it's a part of your healing journey. And yes, it's tough to go through these experiences. It can be absolutely devastating, especially when it comes to people we love or to whom we're very vulnerable, people who've got some kind of power over us, right? Or we give our power away to them. It's just absolutely devastating to go through divorce. It's like, I understand. I've heard from someone who told me that divorce is about one of the worst things that can happen to you in your life. Obviously, there's other things as well, but divorce is very devastating. So, your healing journey, and this again is what Rachel was talking about. It gave her a sense of the meaning and the purpose of her healing, of her life's journey, and all the things that have happened to you have meaning and purpose in your life. They are teachers on this path. And as you can sort of see, none of these three things, getting to know the nature of your entanglement with somebody else, your energetic boundaries, your healing journey, these are three ways to think about taking your power back, growing out of the entanglement, having really healthy and clear energetic boundaries, so you no longer need to invite unconsciously these kinds of entanglements into your life moving forward.
Which I want to be clear, like there are times when that can look like divorce or leaving a relationship that's really toxic or unhealthy, but it doesn't always look like that. Just unhooking your own side, getting your own side untangled, and, choosing what you're going to, how you're going to be can just transform the relationship.
It sure can.
So it's not like, oh, do I, it can be really easy to think that, well, I just have to leave this person because
they're to blame.
They're to blame, and this is toxic. And not see your own, culpability in the dynamic.
And it's so interesting because it's not to say that they're not responsible for their behavior and how they're showing up for you. And, we're not trying to say that you are at fault. Right? No blame. There's no blame. However, and we talk about this in our course, Elevated Presence Masterclass, how you show up has tremendous, far-reaching implications for how other people show up for you. And when you set them free from the entanglement because you take back your stuff and you own your culpability, You own your beliefs. Which means you own your beliefs. You own your worldview. You own your needs. You own your feelings. These feelings are mine.
Yeah.
They weren't caused by you.
Yeah.
I own my own feelings about how I feel about what happened. That's what we mean by taking responsibility. You actually set the other free, and how they turn around and respond can be very different from anything that you could expect.
Oh yeah, it's true.
It's like a magic.
Yeah, and it can be, very inspiring too.
Mm-hmm.
Like I know that, my husband has expressed like deep admiration and inspiration by my owning these really hard things, and he saw the level of like pain and anger and my like beautifully logical arguments for why it was his fault.
All your evidence.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then, to like confess and to own it and, to keep going deeper and to like really transform at that deepest level and to like give him his freedom. He's like, damn.
Yeah,
okay,
damn girl.
Wow. And then, he's had his own like, I'm going to like kind of check out like my own behaviors. Like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
But it can't be a setup where like, all right, I'm going to do this so that, my husband, looks at his own stuff. Like that's very manipulative. You have to truly leave them free.
Yeah.
And then it's also in their own time, like some, it may happen immediately or it may be, over time, somebody is inspired and moved to look at their own patterns and like their own choices. And, cause like me, for instance, I'm a turtle. I like to move slowly. My husband is not a turtle. He, when he is onto the wound that he's, seeing, he's like a Leo. He's all over it. He really dives deep. He sometimes gets sick in his processing, but he will go after it like a bulldog. I will not do that. I will be very cautious and very slow, and drives him a little crazy because I'm less willing to own my stuff, and he will dive all in. And I'm sure like him pushing on you just like puts the brakes on you even more.
Maybe because we're so different in that way. I don't know.
I know that's like my experience. If I start pushing, on my husband who's
he'll just retreat. I think I might be a bit like that.
Okay, that's too much. Like, you really have to give the freedom. Otherwise you can just, run amok, get in the way. That's right. Yeah. Well, cool. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Yeah, my pleasure. I hope people find it, helpful and useful.
Yeah.
And
well, so give us feedback and let us know. Yeah. And if you have any questions relating to your own story, like, well, we're always here and we're always willing to do whatever we can to help. And in turn, we'd love it if you could give us a hand and share about this podcast, share with your friends. Anybody you think would be interested in what we're saying,
just
we would
like get
love
out your
that.
phone, text your friend, this is a podcast I'm listening, see if you find it interesting or helpful. You could just text them the link magenta.fm/podcast.
Yeah.
And they can listen to the most recent episode, or they can maybe spot a title of an episode that, speaks to them.
Yeah.
And that would really help us out as we are growing and trying to get the word out.
Yeah.
So.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Okay.